What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Dolley Madison's surprisingly tragic life, the First Lady, is an important title in American politics. But while everyone has an opinion on what makes a good First Lady, few citizens could tell you where the image of the ideal presidential spouse comes from. The credit for setting the standards of First Ladyship belongs to Dolley Madison, a lesser-known but undeniably badass First Lady who left her mark on United States history. Dolley Madison was the wife of President James Madison. She was born in 1768, and she was present at many crucial events that led to the establishment of the United States, including several of which she was directly involved in. There are countless facts about Dolley Madison that prove she was an elegant and admirable First Lady. Sadly, however, history did not provide her with a happy ending. The tragic story of Dolley Madison is one worth repeating, and one that all Americans should know. Her actual name is unknown. If Dolley Madison really was Dolly, no one knows for sure. Her birth certificate uses that name, but the spelling varies from source to source. Her will is signed Dolly, and plenty of documents refer to her as Dolly. Some historians even claim that her real name was Dorothea. Her family struggled financially. Dolley Payne was born into a life of opulence on a plantation in North Carolina, but a difficult decision her idealistic father made things even more difficult. A Quaker, he was strongly against slavery, but was a slave owner himself. Tired of his hypocrisy, Mr. Payne freed his slaves, sold his plantation, and moved the family to Philadelphia, where he attempted to set up a business. The Paynes faced difficult times following some initial success. In the end, Dolley's father declared bankruptcy. She was regarded as the most beautiful woman of her time. Even without a family fortune, the young Dolley Payne attracted her fair share of suitors. She was regarded as the most beautiful woman of her time. Miss Payne decided to marry Quaker lawyer John Todd because she basically had her pick of the men in town. She witnessed the Constitutional Convention. In the early history of the United States, the 1787 Constitutional Convention was an exciting and significant event. Under George Washington's watchful eye, leaders like Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton gathered to discuss ideas for the establishment of a new nation. Dolley Payne was in Philadelphia while the convention met. She even caught a glimpse of one particular delegate who would become important in her life. James Madison. She lost her first husband and child to yellow fever. Dolley's peaceful life in Philadelphia was not to last. She settled down with her husband John Todd, and they soon had 2 children. But in 1793, yellow fever hit the city. The entire family got sick, and Dolley's husband and second child perished. She and her first child, Payne, both got sick, but they got better. Dolley was a widow and single mother at the age of 25. She had a whirlwind courtship with the older James Madison. Shortly after the heartbreaking loss of her husband and child, Dolley became reacquainted with James Madison through his friend Aaron Burr. The couple got together in a flash and it became the talk of the town. The affair had a tinge of scandal to it. Dolley was a new widow, and Madison was 17 years older than her. The couple first met in May of 1794, and in August of that same year they got engaged. Dolley was asked to give up her Quaker faith as a condition of the marriage, since Madison did not practice the religion himself. She supported the Lewis and Clark expedition. Dolley Madison was a part of the well-known Lewis and Clark expedition a few years before she became the First Lady. Although she couldn't trek across the country herself, she organized a group of D.C. women who gathered supplies and solicited donations for the explorers. With the support of Dolley Madison, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were able to chart the western half of the country. She became the first First Lady. James Madison was elected the 4th President of the United States in 1809. Dolley Madison became the 3rd First Lady after Thomas Jefferson's wife passed away prior to his appointment. In many ways, however, Dolley was the first First Lady as she set the standard that future presidential partners would be judged by. She made the most of her social standing, expressed her opinion on matters of state, and publicly supported her husband. Dolley even began the trend of First Ladies doubling as fashion icons. She was an extremely popular figure. Her nicknames included Lady Presidentess and Queen Dolly. She lavishly decorated the White House and hosted memorable events. Dolley Madison had a taste for fashion, and she brought that stylish sensibility to her new home when her husband was elected in 1809. Dolly was heavily involved in the layout and interior decoration of the White House, which was just beginning to become a symbol of the American government. The First Lady made the most of her elegant environs by hosting fantastic parties, which sometimes included hundreds of guests. She gave the first inaugural ball as well. Dolly was a gracious host who was known for keeping ahead of the latest trends. She was fond of serving a new delicacy known as ice cream. She made powerful friends. Most of the people Dolley Madison interacted with respected her. She was well known for her intelligence in an age when the wit of women was rarely appreciated, and even great thinkers like Thomas Jefferson admired her. She was also well known for developing friendships with influential women like Louisa Adams, the future First Lady. One of the greatest honors bestowed upon the Lady Presidentess was by Samuel Morse, who chose her to be the first civilian to transmit a personal social message from his new invention, the telegraph. She refused to leave Washington during the War of 1812. Dolley Madison made the White House the First Lady's property. Look no further than the War of 1812 for evidence. In 1814, British troops invaded Washington, and the First Lady stayed behind to plan the retreat and preserve as much valuable property as possible. When the British were only a few miles away, she finally agreed to leave. She saved the portrait of George Washington. When Dolley Madison left the White House in 1814, she knew she had to take certain items with her. There was not enough time to save all of Washington's prized possessions from being destroyed by the British, who were likely to burn it down. The First Lady prioritized the famous portrait of George Washington that hung above the White House's fireplace. The White House was burned, but the painting was rescued, and eventually returned to its proper place. She was driven to poverty. After Madison completed his terms as president, he and his wife found themselves without a steady source of income. Their many high-class friendships required them to keep up with an expensive lifestyle, and it began to erode at their personal savings. The family incurred additional expenses as a result of paying Todd, Dolly's gambling addiction from her previous marriage. When James Madison passed away in 1836, Dolly was on the verge of poverty. She sold off the family's properties, and Congress agreed to purchase some of her late husband's papers to ease her financial burdens. She was given an honorary seat in Congress. Even though Dolley Madison's final years were marred by circumstance, the United States did not completely forget its favorite First Lady. Congress gave her an honorary seat, a significant honor in an age before women gained the right to vote. Dolley Madison passed away in 1849 at the age of 81. President Zachary Taylor reportedly eulogized her as the First Lady, and the title was forever associated with her name. Tragic details about First Lady Dolley Madison's life. First Lady Dolley Madison 1768–1849 is an American heroine, known from popular portraits depicting the legendary feat of running out of the White House carrying George Washington's portrait as the British were burning Washington, D.C. She helped save the portrait and personally executed a few founding documents, including the Declaration of Independence, despite the fact that that scene is a myth. The First Lady's actions on that day in adverse times were not particularly surprising, though. Despite growing up in a well-to-do family and marrying the wealthy planter and future President James Madison, she had her share of hardships throughout her life that taught her how to stand on her own 2 feet. Dolley faced numerous financial and personal tragedies, many of them interrelated throughout her 81-year life. Her early years were among the most difficult of her life, with her father's business failures nearly putting her in poverty and her husband and son dying simultaneously. Her surviving son would later be a constant financial thorn in her side as he drank and gambled his life away. Here are the many tragedies of one of America's most famous and influential First Ladies. She witnessed her dad descend into depression. In 1783, John Payne, Dolley Madison's father, decided to move his family from Virginia to Philadelphia, perhaps to be around other members of the Society of Friends aka the Quakers, who had founded the city. He established a laundry starch business there. Although Philadelphia had done relatively well economically during the early Republic, America's first decade of full independence saw a downturn that has been compared to the Great Depression, including a credit crunch, money shortage, and a 30% reduction of GDP. In this environment, the company failed in 1789. Dolley Madison, then 22 years old, didn't write much about her early life, so it's safe to say that things weren't easy. Dolley watched her father descend into depression between 1789 and 1792, the year John Payne passed away. Worst of all, the deeply indebted John Payne was kicked out of the society because the Quakers considered financial stability to be a requirement for membership and a mark of godliness. Ironically, he had previously enforced the very rules for which he had been kicked out. Due to John Payne's near failure, his wife was forced to open a boarding house for additional income. He also got Dolley married to a wealthy lawyer named John Todd. It is unclear whether Dolley wanted the marriage. Biographer Richard Coate argues that Dolley married John Todd for love, as well as stability. Historian Catherine Allgore, however, noted that Dolley had refused Todd before, suggesting the marriage was initially one of convenience that Dolley might have otherwise rejected. Although all seemed well with the marriage, the economic hardships did not end there. On the same day, she lost her son and husband to yellow fever. Dolley Madison's first marriage was a happy one. John Payne Todd and William Temple Todd were born to her and her husband John Todd. The latter was born in 1793, the same year a deadly yellow fever epidemic struck Philadelphia, then the nation's capital. The city's wealthy, including several founding fathers, fled. Dolley, who had just given birth, was unable to travel and needed to be taken away. John, however, stayed, setting the stage for Dolley's quadruple family tragedy. The first casualty of the family was Dolley's mother-in-law, who died on October 11, 1793, according to one of Dolley's letters via Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography to her brother-in-law, James Todd. She expressed her concern that she would soon accompany her to the grave's cold enclosure. Another letter from James informed her of her father-in-law's death and of the dread prospect that her husband would soon follow. Within 2 weeks, John Todd was gone. The hardest blow, however, was the death of her infant son William, who died the same day as his father. Dolley's mother had to write to John Todd's nurse on her daughter's behalf because she was so distraught. Her daughter, she wrote, couldn't write herself today, having the same day consigned her dear husband and her little babe to the silent grave. Dolley's mother begged the maid to send any money John Todd may have left her because she was ill and in danger of losing everything. After Dolley Madison's mother requested money from Dolley's first husband John Todd's estate, Dolley ran into a problem with her brother-in-law, James Todd. He not only wanted his father's estate, which he was entitled to, but his brother's too, according to the Pennsylvania Magazine for History and Biography. Dolley, however, needed her inheritance to avoid poverty. It was also personal for Dolley. In a letter to her brother-in-law, she wrote that the biggest tragedy of the inheritance battle was James' attempt to sell her late husband's library books, from which he, John Todd, wished his child John Payne Todd improved, and should remain sacred. Before she disposed of them, she preferred to feel the pinching hand of poverty. James was putting things off until 1794. Facing financial ruin again, Dolley hired a lawyer and asked James politely once more. She followed it up with a threat. If Todd did not give her the inheritance, she would demand the money, a threat to sue, as she could not wait his return from the proposed excursion without material injury to her affair. As the suit was being settled, Dolley received a lifeline through her marriage to James Madison, who lent his power and influence to resolve the problem. In 1795, she finally got the money owed to her 5 $1,900 checks, each equivalent to over $46,000 today, from the sale of Todd family properties. This marked the end of the tragedies and economic hardships of her early life, although other issues would arise during her marriage to the future president. She was also kicked out of the Society of Friends. Dolley Madison's marriage to James Madison in 1794 jeopardized her membership in the Society of Friends Quakers. Richard Coates' Strength and Honor notes that Quakers were supposed to marry within the society. But late 18th century Philadelphia faced an influx of single men due to its status as the federal capital. Quaker women had more options to marry out of the faith. But the society also expelled people who married out, so with each out marriage, Quaker numbers and influence fell in the city they had founded. Dolley's marriage to James posed an additional problem. Not only was he Episcopalian, he also owned slaves. Meanwhile, one of the earliest opponents of American slavery had been Quakers. It was not an easy decision to leave for Dolley, a member for nearly his entire life. But she chose love and was kicked out of the society. Although Dolley had some friends who were expelled, it hurt to see those who remained Quakers abandon her. A friend and former suitor wrote that her enemies had already spoken out against and condemned her before she got married. Women even averted their eyes when they saw her on the street. She entered new, unfamiliar social settings as a result of the marriage and expulsion. In Quaker circles, everything had been simple, and the people were humble. James Madison, on the other hand, was immersed in a new world of elite sink or swim circles. But despite the abrupt change, she managed to adapt, showing the social grace and charm that made her famous and beloved as a first lady. Her second marriage was childless. By 1800, Dolley Madison's sisters had mostly started having children. However, according to Richard Coates' Strength and Honor, the fact that Dolley and James Madison did not have children bothered them. Their problems became the talk of their social circles, as rumors swirled about James' potential infertility. By 1809, it seemed the couple had finally conceived. In a letter to Thomas Jefferson, Joseph Dougherty wrote that Dolley, by then the First Lady, could not abide the smell of the paint. That might have been on account of her pregnancy. The only evidence of a pregnancy in the Madison marriage is this letter. Due to the fact that it is only mentioned once and that Dolley never had a child, it is possible that she had a stillbirth, a miscarriage, or something similar. Ultimately, it is unclear whose fertility was compromised. Yellow fever and her difficult second pregnancy could theoretically have impacted Dolley's fertility, although yellow fever usually damages the kidneys and liver. A study from the American Urological Association, however, noted that James Madison was an epileptic. There is a correlation between the neurological disorder and lower fertility or even sterility, suggesting that he was the one who was unable to have children. He was not alone in that regard either. George Washington and Andrew Jackson were also likely sterile from smallpox. Regardless, Dolley compensated for her childlessness by doting on her son John Payne Todd, her nieces and nephews, and children of the couple's friends. Virginia Historical Society. Dolley referred to her sister Anna as her sister child, due to the 11-year time gap between them. Anna was Dolley's closest relative and friend. Anna lived with her, basically as her daughter, and was a constant feature in Dolley's daily social life. In 1804, Anna married Congressman Richard Cutts, a day which Dolley described as one of the greatest griefs of her life, as recorded by her niece Lucia Cutts Beverly in the letters and memoirs of Dolley Madison. Nevertheless, she did everything to turn her sister's wedding into a scene of great gaiety. But then Anna left for Maine, meaning Dolley only got to see her when Richard's congressional duties brought him to Washington. The closeness of their relationship showed in Dolley's letter sent to Anna just days after her wedding. She called Anna a ray of brightness on her somber prospects, noting how much she missed her, but was happy to hear that she was doing well and constantly thinking of her. Anna's departure likely affected Dolley more than usual due to a mix of other events. In her letter to her sister, Dolley noted that Thomas Jefferson's daughter Maria, who was also Dolley's friend, had recently died. Her son John Payne, meanwhile, continued weak and sick, while Aaron Burr had shot Alexander Hamilton to death in the duel. Washington, D.C. was mostly empty when Congress was not in session. Being lonely, isolated, and surrounded by death, it is obvious why losing her sister, her main source of comfort, even just to marriage, would have affected her so much. She spent 6 bedridden months away from her husband. On June 4, 1805, Dolley Madison wrote to her sister Anna that she had injured her knee and spent 10 days in bed, unable to walk or put any weight on it. Dolley was suffering from an ulcerated knee. She feared she would never walk again, suggesting amputation was a possibility. Dolly's knee and mental well-being gradually worsened. A letter to Anna from her niece Lucia Cutts Beverley's collection, The Letters and Memoirs of Dolley Madison, dated to July 8, 1805, had her still bedridden and alone in a deserted Washington, D.C. Congress was presumably not in session. Despite her problems, she had committed to helping Thomas Jefferson's granddaughter Virginia do her wedding shopping. Dolly's husband, then Secretary of State James Madison, begged her to see a Philadelphia doctor when her knee problems started. James sought medical attention. She initially refused because she dreaded the separation, but eventually assented, writing to Anna from Philadelphia that she had been well received and assured of recovery. Despite the high standard of care she received, Dolly's letters make it clear that the months of separation from her husband were not easy. When James Madison faced weather problems traveling to Washington, she wrote that she was unable to sleep from anxiety for him. Detention, cold, and accidents seemed to menace him. She also started having dreams about her husband, unable to move, from riding so far and so fast. It was not until mid-November that she was released. But not before she got a special treat. Her sister Anna came to visit. Her husband's death left her all alone. Dolley Madison's marriage to James Madison was a happy one, but by the 1830s, the former president was crippled from rheumatism and unable to walk. The end of their social life as they cared for him meant nothing to Dolly. She never left her husband more than a few minutes at a time, and did not leave the enclosure around her house for 8 months. She hoped he would live until Independence Day, but he refused all medication and died on June 28, 1836. Dolly was crushed. According to her niece Lucia Cutts Beverley's Memoirs and Letters of Dolley Madison, the former First Lady suffered from utter loneliness in a separation from one with whom she had lived so happily for 40 years. But she was kept busy anyway, as famous Americans of all stripes wrote to her expressing their condolences over the death of her husband. Even though she made it a point to respond to each one individually, she was unable to conceal her grief. In her letter to President Andrew Jackson, she said that the high regard for President Madison held by Americans and the condolences she received praising him were her only solace from his death. In a letter to her brother-in-law Richard Cutts, husband of her favorite sister Anna, however, her loneliness showed. She begged him to come visit her and bring all his children, whom she considered as her own, suggesting that staying at home taking care of her husband and his death had left her isolated and needing family support. Her only surviving son used her for money.